So one of the favorite flowers of gardening, I believe, is the hydrangeas. And that is also a common question that we get into a lot of our offices is, why is my hydrangea wilting, or why isn't it blooming, or even looking for a new variety. So this is a topic that I could go well into 2 hours, but I don't have 2 hours. So you get me for a little more than 10 minutes. So the art of growing hydrangeas, it can be easy or it can be difficult, and it just depends on the species that you pick and also the location that you're planting them. First off, I want to say there's over 100 species of hydrangeas. When you take a look online and you see all the different varieties, it's just a very wide range of what you can find, from little petite bushes to larger bushes to small trees, and there are some climbing forms. They're all pretty much from Asia, other than a few species that we have that are native here to the United States. Hydrangeas really picked up steam in the 1800s, mainly grown for their flowers, although there are a few that can be grown for the fall coloring. Oak leaf hydrangea is one of the main ones. I know that everybody likes to think of hydrangeas as being, you can change from a blue flower to a pink flower, but in reality, not all varieties do that. The only one that will do that is Hydrangea macrophylla. And so you have to seek out that variety or that species, I should say, in order to be able to change that color. And I've got a slide coming up that will talk a little bit about that. And when we talk about blooms, there's two different blooms that you can get on a hydrangea. One is a lace cap and the other is a mop head. The traditional ones that we think of that mom had or grandma had, those are the mop heads. Typically, that's the bulk of our hydrangeas. So it's about 500 cultivars. And they're just the full round globes and mostly sterile inflorescence is what we call it. Whereas the lace caps over to the left, it's 20 varieties. And so these are the more modern ones that we've bred to be for the gardens. It's a saucer shape inflorescence, so it's got a lot of little bitty flowers in the center with the florets around the edge. And so two very different, distinct looking bloom heads. And so I always tell people, try to figure out which one you want and then go after those specific cultivars or those specific varieties. As you can see from this slide, we can get quite a bit of bloom out of hydrangeas by selecting the different species or the different cultivars. And it's really nice to know that you can have something blooming for a prolonged amount of time instead of just a small 3-week window. And so I'm going to go through some of these as we go. Culture requirements, they like a well-drained soil, but they also like fertility. They like a high organic matter. pH typically is 6 to 6.2. On the macrophyllas, like I mentioned earlier, the pH will dictate the color of the bloom. So you got to pay attention to that. Light preference is part shade. And I've got a slide coming up next to explain a little bit of it. Some like morning sun, some like afternoon sun, and some like dappled shade. And so once again, you've got to do your research to figure out exactly which hydrangea you want versus which ones you probably already have in your yard and is it the right location. So we have to think about that. And then on fertility, they like to be fertilized at least once a year, typically in the months of May or June. Some of them will actually benefit to 2 fertilizations a month apart, but I would not fertilize past July. Just keep that in mind. On pruning hydrangeas, not all hydrangeas are the same at pruning. Some of them will bloom on new wood, some of them will bloom on old wood. And so this will dictate how you prune those hydrangeas. On new wood, if they bloom on new wood, that means they set the bloom buds in the spring, which means that you can prune them up until spring, but not past spring, because then you'll cut off the bloom buds. If they bloom on old wood, that means they set the buds in the fall. And so if you would go and prune one of those hydrangeas in the fall, you will not have blooms in the spring. And so you have to make sure which species you have and base the pruning on that species. And so definitely 2 very different ways of pruning. If you don't know which hydrangea you have, the best thing you can do is prune right after blooming each year. And that way you know for sure you're not pruning off of any of the bloom buds. Okay, so when we talk about hydrangeas are part sun. This is sort of a chart I made that will sort of explain, okay, part sun is not the same as part shade. A long time ago, I thought that was the case. And it wasn't till recently that I started looking it up because I was curious. I was like, well, all right, some books say part sun, some say part shade. What's the difference? Well, if you look at this chart, full sun is 6 or more hours. Part sun is 4 to 6 hours. And so this is where you would probably get 4 to 6 hours of sun, or you would try to concentrate on afternoon sun. Part shade means that you would have 2 to 4 hours of sunlight, or you could go with morning sun. And then, of course, full shade is 0 to 2 hours of sunlight. And so most of our hydrangeas are somewhere between part sun and part shade. And once again, it goes back to research and finding out what variety you have or what species you have and what it takes. I know that one always a sad moment for me is driving down through a neighborhood and I see this poor little hydrangea out in full sun. And when I say full sun, I'm talking about all day sun. And it is so wilted down and drooping. And it's not because of lack of water. It's because it's just way too much sun exposure. And so we really have to pay attention to how much sun we are giving these plants. So just to go over some of the more commonly available hydrangeas, this is Hydrangea arborens, and this is the smooth hydrangea. The most common one we know of is called the Annabelle hydrangea, which was actually founded over in Anna, Illinois. And so it's a beautiful mop head, and it's in the picture to the upper right. And it blooms from May to August, and it just has a big old white mop head to it. And there are lots of newer cultivars out there, and some of them are more petite, some of them are bigger, some of them have smaller blooms, some of them have bigger blooms. And so seek out what you're looking for. This one actually blooms on new wood, so actually pruning it in the fall would be okay, or pruning it in late winter would be okay. Then we have Hydrangea macrophylla. This one is what we call the big leaf hydrangea. This is what normally everybody thinks of when people talk about hydrangeas. It's the one that you can go from blue to pink depending on what that pH is. Now this one is not exactly really hardy. And so this is one that can have a lot of freeze damage, especially if we have a cold winter. And so this is one that we commonly hear of, oh, well, my hydrangea didn't bloom this year. Well, the first question comes up, did you prune? Well, no. Well, if you didn't prune and it's still not blooming, quite possibly it got hit hard by a freeze or a frost and will not have bloom buds. So just keep that in mind. This one is no more than 4 to 6 hours of sun. So it really needs that probably afternoon shade to really perform its best. All right, now when we talk about blue versus pink on the macrophylla, it's all about the aluminum, and that's found in the soil. And it's the pH that we alter to either make that aluminum available or that aluminum is not available. And so elevated pH can lock up the aluminum and gives us a pink color. By lowering the pH, we can create a blue color, and that is by decreasing that pH. So you would apply lime to bring that pH up, and we would also apply sulfur or ammonium sulfate to bring it down. I would avoid aluminum sulfate because you do not want to keep adding aluminum to the soil. We typically have enough aluminum there, and so we just recommend the ammonium sulfate or sulfur. And if you wonder what your pH is, get a soil test, and that way you know exactly if you need to bring it up or lower it. Another one that is commonly planted here in the last several years is the panicle hydrangea. It is a more upright hydrangea, so it's not more of the short shrub. It will get up to 10 feet. Very hardy. This is one that has been known to be planted up in Iowa, Nebraska, some of those colder climates, and they do just fine. The flowers can range from white to ivory. We've seen them as lime green. A lot of times when they fade, they turn into pink, and they are a little bit later flowering. So we'll see them from July to October. There are some compact varieties. If you want a shorter one, go after a shorter one. But this one is partial sun to partial shade, so you can have a little bit more variability between that 4 and 6 hours of sun. We have Hydrangea serrata, which is the sawtooth hydrangea. This is the one that has more of the lace cap blooms. Most of them are found in Asia, of course, but this one is more native to Japan, Korea, or parts of China. And they are going to be more cold hardy than the macrophylla, but not as cold hardy as the panicle hydrangea. But these are gorgeous. And so it's well worth putting in your landscape, but they are easily overcrowded and sometimes they can be a little bit weaker. And so it's one that you're going to take a little bit more care of, even though it's winter hardier, it may not be as summer hardy. So just keep that in mind. And then, of course, then we have the oak leaf hydrangea, which is Hydrangea quercifolia. It is our native hydrangea. It is found to the southeastern part of the United States. And these can get quite big. I know that on this slide it says 6 foot by 6 foot. I've actually seen them grow as big as 8, 9 feet tall. And so these can get pretty large. So if you want a smaller, compact version, you need to seek out that variety that stays smaller. I like oak leaf because it starts out with a creamy white bloom, and as the bloom fades, it turns into colors of pink and rose. It does have exfoliating bark, and that makes it really attractive too. But this bush can do very well. I would recommend that it gets afternoon sun because it does tend to suffer if you put it in too much shade. The leaves will get too big and it doesn't thrive. But also on the flip side of it, avoid full 100% sun because then the leaves look really burnt and yellow and they look really small. And this one blooms on old wood, so watch when you prune it.